"Sir, this is a formal event. You're not dressed properly, and your name isn't on the list," said the man at the door. The old man didn't say anything. He didn't argue. But what happened next made everyone in the room stop and stare. The lobby was full of people wearing fancy clothes. Men wore black suits, and women wore long, shiny dresses. They smiled quietly, holding thin glasses, and talked in soft voices. The floor was shiny, the lights were warm, and soft music played in the background, the kind you barely notice. Then the glass doors opened, and an old man walked in slowly. He looked like he was around 75. His back was slightly bent, and his eyes looked kind but tired. His name was Walter Gaines. He wore clean pants, a simple shirt, and an old brown coat that looked like it had been with him for many years. In his hand, he held a small envelope. It was wrinkled at the corners, like it had been carried in his pocket for a while. Walter made his way to the check-in table. A young man stood behind it, wearing a neat suit and a name tag that read, Evan, Event Coordinator. Evan looked at Walter from head to toe. He noticed the worn shoes, the older coat, and the man's weathered face. He gave a tight smile, polite but cold. "Sir," Evan said, "this is a black tie event. You need to be wearing a jacket and tie." Walter didn't answer. He simply held out the envelope with both hands, quietly and steadily. Evan took the envelope, checked the name on it, then glanced down at the guest list on his tablet. "I don't see your name here," he said. "Looks like this is just a side invitation. Maybe someone made a mistake." Walter spoke softly. "Mr. Lyle invited me. He wrote the note himself." Evan let out a small sigh. He gave the envelope back without even looking Walter in the eye. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have rules. I can't let you in. Please step aside." Walter didn't argue. He didn't get upset. He just nodded gently and moved away from the table. A couple near the door had been watching. The woman leaned in and whispered something to her husband. Another guest saw Walter too, then quickly looked away. No one said anything. No one offered to help. Walter walked slowly to a quiet corner near the wall. He still held the envelope in his hands. He didn't turn around. He didn't leave. He just stood there, quietly waiting, while the music played and the party went on like he wasn't even there. Walter Gaines lived in a small apartment on the quiet side of town. The building was old and the walls sometimes creaked when the wind blew at night. His place was simple: one bedroom, one chair by the window, and a shelf with a few old books. He didn't own much, and he didn't need to. Most days, Walter kept to himself. He'd go for slow walks, help a neighbor fix a leaky pipe, or sit at the park and watch the birds. People in the area knew him as the man who was always polite, always calm. He didn't talk much about where he'd been or what he'd done, and no one asked. But there was more to him than anyone knew. Under his bed, in an old shoebox, were a few things he never showed anyone. A small medal, dull from age but clean, a stack of letters written in faded ink, and some black and white photos. Young men in uniforms standing in the snow, some smiling, some not. Walter had served in a war that many people forgot. It wasn't the kind they made movies about, but it stayed with him. Every cold night, every quiet morning. He remembered the faces of friends who didn't make it home. He remembered the sound of boots in frozen dirt, and he remembered how loud silence could be after everything went quiet. He never told stories. He never bragged. But years ago, a man named Mr. Lyle, who worked at the local historical center, had asked Walter to help with an exhibit. They had talked once or twice. Walter had shared a few memories, just enough for Mr. Lyle to understand that Walter had been there, and that he remembered more than he let on. A few weeks ago, a letter came. Handwritten. It was from Mr. Lyle. He invited Walter to a special event, a ceremony for veterans, honoring those who served in that forgotten war. He asked Walter to attend as a guest of honor. He said the exhibit wouldn't be complete without him. Walter wasn't sure at first. These kinds of events made him feel out of place. But he remembered the names of the boys in those photos, and something in him said he should go. Not for himself, but for them. So he took out his best clothes, pressed his shirt, cleaned his old coat, and tucked the invitation carefully into his inside pocket. He didn't go to be seen. He went to remember. Walter stood near the side wall, not far from the entrance. The music was still playing, and people kept arriving, smiling, laughing, taking pictures. No one looked at him. He didn't expect them to. He didn't sit down. He didn't speak. He just waited. He held the envelope in both hands, his thumbs pressing gently into the crease. He looked toward the main hall, where he could see flashes of light and moving shapes. Every now and then, a waiter passed with a tray of drinks. None stopped near him. From where he stood, Walter could see part of the exhibit. A large photo was hanging near the entrance to the gallery. It showed soldiers in heavy coats, standing close together in the snow. Their faces were tired. Some looked directly at the camera. Others looked away. Walter knew that place. He remembered the cold. He remembered the snow that never melted, and the silence that came after the gun stopped. His eyes rested on one of the faces in the photo. A boy, no more than 19. Walter remembered his name, and how he used to whistle before every patrol. The memory hit deep, but Walter didn't move. He just kept looking. Behind him, people kept entering. Their voices bounced off the marble floor. Shoes clicked, glasses clinked. Every sound felt far away, like he was watching it all from behind a window. Some guests gave him quick glances, wondering why he was standing there. One man raised an eyebrow, then looked away. No one asked. No one offered help. But Walter didn't seem bothered. He wasn't here to ask for attention. He was here because he was invited. He was here because he had lived what others were now calling history. He pulled his coat a little tighter. The room wasn't cold, but he felt a chill anyway. Maybe it came from the memories. Maybe it came from being unseen. Still, he didn't leave. He stood quietly, waiting, just as he had done so many times before. He had been standing there quietly for over 10 minutes, ignored by everyone. But then, one young woman noticed what no one else did, and walked toward him. Walter stayed near the wall, standing as still as a statue. His shoulders were straight, his hands still holding the envelope. He looked calm, but inside he was tired. Not just from standing, but from the way people looked past him, like he wasn't even there. Most guests didn't notice, and if they did, they said nothing. But one young woman did. She looked like she worked there. Her name tag said Claire, Guest Services. She wasn't wearing a suit like the others, just a neat blouse and a nervous smile. She had seen Walter standing alone for a while, and something about him didn't sit right with her. So she walked over slowly. "Excuse me, sir," she said kindly. "Are you waiting for someone? Can I help you find your seat?" Walter turned to her. His face softened. "No, thank you," he said gently. "I was invited, but I'm not dressed right, it seems." He held out the envelope, still carefully folded. Claire took a quick glance at it. Her eyebrows lifted. "Mr. Gaines?" she asked. "Wait. Mr. Lyle mentioned someone important was coming tonight. Someone connected to the new exhibit." Walter gave a small smile. "He said the same to me." Before she could say more, another voice cut in. Sharper, louder. "Claire," said Evan, the event coordinator, walking over quickly. "Is there a problem?" She stepped back a little. "No, I was just helping." Evan held up a hand. "This gentleman has already been told he can't enter. He's not on the list. Dress code." Claire glanced between Evan and Walter. She hesitated, then looked down. "Please return to the front," Evan said firmly. "I'll handle this." She nodded and walked away, glancing back once. Her eyes said what her voice couldn't. "I'm sorry." Evan turned to Walter again. His tone had changed. It was colder now. "Sir," he said, "I must ask you to leave the lobby. If you remain here, I'll have to call security." Walter looked him in the eye. Calm, steady. "I'm waiting for Mr. Lyle," he said. "That's all." Evan gave a quiet scoff and turned away. Walter stayed where he was, still waiting, still unseen, except by one person. The crowd inside the hall moved with ease and comfort. Waiters floated by with drinks, conversations flowed, and laughter bounced softly across the tall ceilings. But in the corner near the rope, Walter stood alone. He hadn't moved in over 20 minutes. He looked toward the exhibit doors now and then, but mostly he just waited. The air inside was warm, but his hands were still cold. Then something shifted. The large glass doors at the front spun open again. Faster this time. The wind rushed in briefly. A few heads turned, expecting another guest or sponsor. But the moment the man stepped through the entrance, the room changed. He was tall, dressed in a sharp military uniform, straight posture, steady steps. Silver stars gleamed on each shoulder, 4 on each side. His chest was covered with ribbons and medals, each one earned, not given. It was General Richard Halbrook, the guest of honor. People near the front noticed first. They stopped mid-sentence. A few stood a little straighter. The museum director rushed forward with open arms, ready to welcome him. But the general didn't stop. His eyes scanned the room quickly, not searching for decorations or cameras, but for something else. Then he saw Walter, and he froze. For a second, the general just stared. His face changed. First came surprise, then deep recognition, then something softer, almost like regret and respect. Without a word, General Halbrook turned and began walking straight toward Walter, ignoring the museum director, the staff, and even Evan, who stepped back in confusion. The sound of his polished shoes on the marble floor echoed more than the music. People turned to watch. Walter looked up. His expression stayed calm, but his eyes widened a little. He hadn't seen the general in years. They had shared something once, a place, a battle, a loss. The general stopped right in front of Walter. He didn't speak. He didn't reach out his hand. He saluted. The gesture was sharp and full of meaning. It wasn't for the crowd. It wasn't for tradition. It was for Walter. Walter stood up a little straighter. His shoulders pulled back, and though his hand trembled slightly, he raised it and returned the salute. "Sergeant Gaines," the general said clearly, his voice steady. "It's an honor to see you again." Walter nodded. "Likewise, sir." For a long moment, they said nothing. Around them, the lobby had gone quiet. The music still played, but no one was listening now. Guests whispered. Phones were lowered. Everyone was watching. Evan looked pale. The museum director looked confused. The general turned slowly toward the check-in table and then back to Walter. "Why are you standing out here?" he asked gently. "This exhibit is about men like you. You should be in the front row." Walter didn't answer right away. He looked down at the envelope in his hand. "They said I wasn't dressed for it," he said simply. General Halbrook stood quietly for a moment. He looked at Walter, then at the staff, then at the people watching. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but every word hit hard. "You told him he couldn't come in?" the general asked, turning to Evan. His voice wasn't angry. It was controlled, careful, sharp. Evan swallowed. He tried to answer, but the words didn't come right away. I didn't know who he was, sir," he said. "He wasn't on the main guest list." "And the dress code?" "The dress code?" the general repeated. He looked at Walter's coat, then back at Evan. "You see that coat?" he said, now facing the whole room. "It's older than some of the people here. That coat kept this man warm in a war you've only read about in books." The room was quiet now. No one moved. No one spoke. "He wore that same coat while leading men through snow and fire. He saved lives in it, including mine." There was a pause, a deep, heavy pause. "This is Sergeant Walter Gaines," the general continued. "He was my team leader when I was just starting out. He taught me how to stay alive, how to stay calm. He pulled 3 men to safety under fire, and he never once asked for credit." Evan looked down. His face had gone pale. The general turned to the crowd. "You're here tonight to honor heroes," he said, "but the one man who actually lived what's in that exhibit was told to wait outside." He pointed gently toward the large photo near the gallery doors. "You see that image over there? That's his squad. That's his memory. And you almost made him miss it because he didn't look the part." Some guests looked at the floor. Others stared at Walter with a new expression. Not pity, but quiet respect. "This man isn't just part of history," the general said. "He carried it." He turned back to Evan. "Events like this mean nothing if the people they're meant to honor are treated like they don't belong." The museum director stepped forward, trying to speak, but the general raised a hand. "I'm not here for speeches," he said, "and I won't stand in a place that doesn't respect the people who made all this possible." Then he turned back to Walter. "Come with me," he said softly. "There's something inside I think you should see properly." And just like that, the general offered his arm. Walter paused. Then he nodded and walked beside him. Slowly, calmly. The crowd parted. The noise didn't come back. No one clapped. No one cheered. But everyone felt what had changed. News about what happened spread quickly, not just through the museum, but through the whole town by the next morning. Someone had taken a photo of the general saluting Walter. Someone else had recorded the moment he spoke up. By evening, it was on local news websites and shared across social media. The headline was simple: General walks out after veteran denied entry at gala. The article didn't use big words. It just told the truth. An old man had come with an invitation. He was turned away at the door. He had waited quietly until someone remembered who he really was. The museum released a short public statement. They called it a misunderstanding, but most people didn't see it that way. Evan, the young event coordinator, was let go quietly later that week. No one said much about it. He wasn't seen at the museum again. The board issued a full apology to Walter and to all veterans who had ever been overlooked. They also announced a new policy. No one would be turned away for how they looked. Not ever again. Donations started coming in. Small at first, then more. Many were marked, in honor of Sergeant Gaines. The museum used part of the money to update the war exhibit. They added a plaque with Walter's name on it. They also created a new scholarship in his honor for local students who wanted to study history and memory, not just facts. Walter didn't say much about it. He still lived in the same small apartment, still went for his walks, still helped his neighbors fix broken chairs and squeaky doors. People in the neighborhood began to greet him differently, though, with a pause, with respect. Some of them didn't even know the whole story, but they had heard enough to understand. At the local cafe, the owner started bringing his coffee to the table without asking. At the corner store, kids held the door open a little longer. No one made speeches, but something had changed. Walter never liked too much attention. Even after everything that happened, he went back to his regular routine. Same coat, same slow walks through the park, same old key that stuck in the front door of his apartment. But things around him felt different. At the hardware store, the owner didn't charge him for nails anymore. At the barber shop, someone always gave up their seat. Even the postman, who used to just wave, now stopped to shake his hand. Walter never asked for this. He didn't want praise, but the way people looked at him had changed. It wasn't pity, it was something quieter, something deeper, a kind of respect that can't be bought or taught. Every few weeks, General Halbrook would stop by. No uniform, no formal visit, just coffee and quiet conversation. Sometimes they talked about the old days. Sometimes they just sat, not saying anything at all. One afternoon, the general picked up the small medal on Walter's shelf, the one that had stayed in that shoebox for years. "You know," he said, "shutting that event down wasn't about making a statement. It was about reminding people what these really mean." He looked at the medal for a long time, then placed it back down gently. Walter nodded slowly. "Most people forget," he said, "but maybe that's just how life moves." The general didn't argue. He just looked out the window and said, "Then maybe it's our job to remind them." Quietly. Outside, kids played on the street. A car horn echoed in the distance. The world moved on, as it always does. But something had shifted. Walter would still walk alone, still dress the same. But now when people saw him, they really saw him. He wasn't a headline anymore. He wasn't a symbol. He was just a man who had waited at a door and finally been seen. And somewhere in the silence, people remembered. People forgot him at the door. But by the end of the night, they couldn't forget his name. Walter never asked to be noticed. He never wanted to be the center of anything. He had shown up quietly holding an old envelope and got told to wait outside. But sometimes the people we overlook the most are the ones who built the ground we stand on. He didn't shout. He didn't push back. He just waited. And in that stillness, something powerful happened. A 4-star general stopped the whole event for him. The room fell silent. The truth stood tall. Walter had no speech. He gave no statement. He just walked inside slowly and reminded everyone what real honor looks like. Not in medals, not in suits, but in quiet courage, in staying calm when others forget your name, in showing up even when no one's looking. That night, the gala ended early, but something bigger started, a story that would be told for years. Not about the event, but about the man who stood near the rope and waited. And in that small, quiet moment, the world remembered what a hero really looks like. If you liked it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment down your opinions about this story. Thanks for watching.